This video series is about interviewing techniques, and this is just a overview of the process associated with this. You'll learn some other interviewing techniques, especially in qualitative research course. The value of this is it gives you some basic skills of understanding how to get information from people that you don't know very much about. One of the challenges that we'll discover with using things like surveys is surveys are really designed to force people to think about an issue in the way that we might think about it. An interview, the advantage of that is you provide a topic of information to somebody, and then they can expand on how they feel about it or their views on it. And very often you'll get information that you didn't consider because people see things in such a different way. We want to use open-ended questions as much as possible because that leaves open the possibility of gathering more information. It's not limiting in any way. We want to avoid leading questions, and I'll give you some details about that. We want to be able to probe issues in depth. We don't want to just ask a simple question. We want to, but depending upon what somebody tells us, we want to be able to take that a little bit further and let the information that we are gathering lead the direction that we're going to some extent. Sometimes if you're doing this with a group of people, it's easy for that group to wander off in a direction that you don't necessarily want to go. So we'll go through some exercises when we meet face-to-face about how this works. Closed questions are the kind of things where the answer choices are either given to the respondent or understood by the respondent. A closed question, it would be something like a yes/no question. Do you have children in school? What grade are your kids in? Those are the kinds of closed-ended questions that really limit the kinds of responses we get. Open-ended questions are the kinds of questions that allow the respondent to answer without any present or implied choices. So here's the kinds of things that start an open-ended question. Words like what, where, who, how, when. And some people use the word why. I'm not big on using that word because when you ask a person why they did something or why they feel a certain way, what that does is it causes them to get defensive. They feel like they're going to have to defend their position or defend why they feel a certain way about something. And very often that's going to put them on the defensive, and they're going to be less willing to participate in that. And there's a technique to getting around that. It's something that I learned from working with choice theory. In choice theory, you don't ask a person, why did you do that? You ask them a question like, well, what were you hoping to get from that? So when we go through these exercises together, we'll have an opportunity to do that. We want to avoid leading questions. We want to allow people to answer in their own terms, voice their views, their values, experiences, and obviously we don't want to do any of that in a judgmental way. Leading questions are phrased to suggest a particular answer or to imply that one answer is expected. So if you were to ask a person, don't you think that our schools could do a better job with preventing bullying? That is leading them that you've already made up your mind that bullying is a problem, that schools need to do something about it, and that you are encouraging that person to agree with the way that you see the world. And that's a mistake to do that. We don't want to do that in qualitative research. We want to be able to leave open the possibility of anything that they might value. Obviously, non-leading questions don't do that. And when you develop your questions, you really need to spend a lot of time thinking about how am I getting information from them that is going to encourage them to want to continue to share what we're doing. So some of these, for example, what fears do you have about your child's education? That is a leading question. What we really mean is, how do you feel about your child's education? The problem with with a phrase like, what fears do you have about your child's education, implies that they should have fears about their child's education, or that that's the only way to feel about it. So the better option is just tell us how you feel about your child's education. What actions do you take when your child struggles in schools? This makes an assumption that their child struggles in school, which may not necessarily be true. And what can happen is it could foster the idea in this person's mind that their child might struggle, or they're not doing enough, that they don't realize their child's struggling in school. Maybe there's something they should be doing. So the simple question is, how do you participate in your child's education? Which leaves open this possibility, but it also leaves open the possibility of the kid isn't struggling in school, they actually do okay, but they still participate. Another one was, how well was your child treated at school? This phrase assumes that their child was treated well. That's not necessarily true all the time, so we want to make that much simpler and simply saying, how is your child treated at school? So there's a very subtle things that make a difference, but we don't want to set them up to think that they should feel a certain way about their child's education. Probing. The key to successful interviewing is learning how to probe effectively. This is a time where it's really important that we have this face-to-face opportunity, because I'm going to show you some ways to do that you can probe and get more information from a person without making them feel defensive. And what we're trying to do is stimulate an informant to produce more information than what they might necessarily want to have had done before. And there's times, if it's a controversial topic, that they might not be willing to do that. But there are certainly techniques we can employ to get better at that. But you don't want to inject too much of yourself into the interaction, so that all that you're getting is a reflection of yourself in the data. So really what we're talking about is something called member checking. There's ways of encouraging people to do that. So the first one, and this came out backwards, but that's okay. First one's called a silent probe. And this is a technique where you remain quiet and you wait for the form to continue. My experience with this is, if you're talking to somebody about a very sensitive topic and they really want to put their guard up about how they respond, you really need to give them some time to think through that and make sure about what they want to say. The other one that I think a lot of people struggle with is the idea of interviewing somebody that's an introvert. An introvert will, if you ask them a question, will really think about what it is that they want to say and how they want to respond. And that's very difficult for an extrovert to understand that process is going on. I have a cousin who's even more of an introvert than I am. When I talk to him on the phone, there's times that you're not sure that he's still there. And what he's doing is, if I ask him a question, he's really thinking about what he wants to say. I need to give him time to respond. It's not wrong, it's just the way that it is. Very often the silent probe will happen while you're writing. I also encourage people now to record what they are doing to record their interviews. And you need to tell them, the participants, that you're doing this. But explain to them that you're writing notes, and there may be times that you pause and you're not asking questions because you want to make sure you get the information down correctly. There is something called an echo probe, which is also known as member checking. And what you're doing is you're repeating the last thing an informant said and asking them to continue. So if I ask a person, how do you feel about your child's education? And that person were to say, I don't think my child's getting a very good education. I could say something like, you said that you don't think your child's getting a good education. Can you tell me what your child is struggling with, or give me some other ideas about how I could better understand that. I want to show you that, there's some other things about how people feel about schools that I think are really important, that it's really hard for us sometimes to understand where people are coming from. The other technique is simply saying, uh-huh. It encourages the participant to continue with a narrative by making affirmative noises. And the other thing that you can do, obviously, is to nod your head in understanding how to do, what they're saying and in encouraging that. When I used to teach classroom management, I used to teach our students if there's a way that you can control a lecture in the classroom, if you sit in the front of a room where you have a professor that's lecturing, and yes, we do still have people that do a lot of that, you can control the pace of the lecture simply by your body language. If you want to speed things up, you can nod your head and say, uh-huh, I understand. If you want to slow things down, you can have put a confused look on your face and tilt your head in one direction. But either way, that person giving the lecture will start to focus on that person at the front of the room, and that person can control the pace of the entire class. What you don't want to do is combine all of this, and here's why. It comes off very odd. If you're using a silent probe and then switching to uh-huh, and then member checking it and going back to uh-huh, you seem like that you're not interested in what's going on, that you're bouncing around all over the place, and that you don't really want to be there. So what I encourage you to do is, before you go into a setting where you're going to be doing this, and you will have to do this, is practice it with other people. And when you're done practicing that, there's two things that need to happen. One is you need to reflect upon your own techniques with that person, but you need to have that other person also give you some feedback about how things went. So you want the informant to lead. In an unstructured interview, you keep the conversation focused on a topic while giving the informant enough room to define the content of the discussion. If you obviously are going to have a set of topics that you want to get through, but if that person goes down one of your topics and is going down a road that is beneficial to you, let it go. Because you don't want to stop the flow of that information if you see that it's useful. So the rule is if you get an informant on a topic of interest, get out of the way. Let that person provide the information that he or she thinks is important. If you do anything to stop that, you may never be able to get it started again. A few other tips. Don't begin the interview right away. Take some time to get to know this person, especially if you're going to ask them some difficult questions. Provide some kind of friendly greeting. Explain to them what's going on, why it's important to participate this, what your role is, what you're going to do with this information. You want to establish what we would call a cultural ignorance, and that means that you as the interviewer are the learner. You're really just sitting there to gather information. You want to listen and express interest in what that informant tells you. What they're telling you is sometimes very deep feelings about what's going on, for example, in a school setting. And you really need to be there as a participant of just gathering information. And you want it to be more like a friendly conversation. And you want it to be more friendly, especially when the more controversial it is. You don't want it to be a strict question and answer exchange. You want to be neutral. You don't want to approve or disapprove. You just gather information and accept what it is. We want to try to encourage the informant to expand on their answers as much as possible. Informants have a tendency to abbreviate their answers. So use words like describe or tell me some more about what you mean about this particular topic. And do not move on to a new topic until you've really explored the informant's knowledge on the question at hand. Make sure that you truly understand what's going on. You want to use the informant's own language to ask new questions. That way it is built upon what it is that they value. Do this as you learn the informant's language. So it's going to take some time to spool up to how they see the world. So I want to pause here because I'm about to run out of my 15 minutes, and then I'll have the last couple of slides on the next video, which will be obviously much shorter.